In the shining city of Novatech, towers of glass and metal touched the clouds. Among them stood the headquarters of Asterion Dynamics, a company known across the world for building machines that almost thought like people. Its newest project, named Project Helix, was supposed to change the world of transportation. It was an AI system that could control a network of cargo drones able to deliver goods anywhere within minutes. Investors called it the heartbeat of the new age. The world waited for its launch. But now, everything had stopped inside the main research building. 30 engineers sat before glowing screens filled with endless lines of code. The air was thick with stress and the quiet sound of keyboards. Monitors flashed red warnings and the large central display showed the same message again and again. System error. Feedback loop failed. Restarting attempt unsuccessful. The head of the project, a calm but tired man named Dr. Halden, rubbed his forehead. His eyes were red from sleepless nights. Around him, his team looked broken. They had spent weeks trying to fix a problem that no one understood. The AI would start, run for a few seconds, and then shut itself down. Every test led to failure. The company board was demanding answers and time was running out. In the corner of the same building, a delivery girl named Mira was waiting near the security desk. She carried a small box of food orders for the engineering team. Mira was in her early 20s and wore a faded delivery jacket. Her brown hair was tied back and her shoes were worn from long hours of work. She was not part of the company, but she came here often since the engineers ordered meals from her service every day. Most people in the building barely noticed her, but she watched everything around her with quiet curiosity. As she waited for clearance to enter, she could hear voices from the meeting room through the half-open door. The engineers sounded frustrated. One voice said the problem was in the neural logic system. Another said the machine learning core was rejecting human input. A third voice simply said they should shut the project down. Mira listened without meaning to. She did not understand all the terms, but the tension in their voices made her heart beat faster. She liked solving puzzles, even if they were far beyond her world. When the guard finally let her in, she walked through the wide corridor lined with glowing panels that showed drone flight paths and code charts. The lab looked like a world made of light. She placed the food boxes on a table near the main console. One of the engineers, a young man named Rico, thanked her and went back to typing. Mira looked at the screens for a moment. The symbols were confusing but strangely rhythmic. They repeated in a way that reminded her of something she had seen before, though she could not tell what. Rico noticed her staring and smiled weakly. "Don't worry about this mess," he said, trying to sound polite. "Even we don't understand it anymore." Mira laughed softly and replied that she hoped they figured it out soon because they all looked too tired to eat. Then she left the room, but the pattern she had seen stayed in her mind outside. The city lights blinked against the night sky. Mira sat on her delivery bike, waiting for her next order. She could not stop thinking about the strange pattern on the screen. It looked like a repeating beat, almost like the pulse of a song. She remembered how she used to teach her younger brother math using rhythm games. She had always been better at noticing patterns than reading numbers. The more she thought about it, the more she wondered if that was what the engineers were missing, but she shook her head and told herself it was impossible. She was just a delivery worker. What could she know about artificial intelligence back inside Asterion Dynamics? The engineers worked through the night. Dr. Halden stood before the main console with his arms crossed. 30 of us and not one can fix a simple feedback loop, he said in a low voice. If we fail again tomorrow, the board will freeze the project. Years of work gone. One of the senior programmers, a woman named Lena, tried to stay positive. Maybe it's not a bug, she said. Maybe the system is waiting for something we haven't given it. Halden sighed. Waiting for what? We've tested every command. Every line of code checks out. It's like the AI doesn't want to wake up. They kept running simulations, but the result never changed. The system started, processed a few signals, then stopped. It behaved almost like a living thing that refused to breathe. The engineers grew more desperate as the night turned into morning. Mira returned again the next day, carrying breakfast for the same group. Her curiosity had not faded. She placed the boxes quietly but could not help glancing at the screens again. The pattern was still there, pulsing in waves of blue and white. Something about it called to her sense of rhythm. This time she asked Rico if she could ask a question. He shrugged and said sure, why not? Everyone had already run out of ideas. Why does the pattern repeat like that? She asked. It looks like it's waiting for something between the lines. Rico smiled tiredly. You noticed that too, he said. It's part of the signal loop. It's supposed to connect the drone control net to the AI's learning core. But it keeps breaking down. The system keeps looping without feedback. We think it's missing a data key, or maybe there's an internal lock we can't find. Mira nodded, though she understood only part of it. Maybe it's not a lock, she said softly. Maybe it's waiting for a rhythm to match. Rico laughed. A rhythm, he repeated. That's creative, but machines don't listen to rhythm. They read logic. Mira smiled back and said she guessed that made sense. But as she walked away, she whispered to herself that maybe logic was just another kind of rhythm that people forgot to hear. Later that night, in her small apartment on the edge of the city, Mira sat at her old table with a broken tablet she used for side jobs. She had scribbled down part of the code pattern she remembered. The tablet flickered but worked just enough for her to run a simple simulation. She wrote a few lines of code based on the rhythm she saw, replacing numbers with pulse intervals like beats in a song. The screen flashed a faint green light. For a moment she imagined that the code came alive. It was a small thing, but it gave her an idea. She stayed up late trying different pulse combinations, matching them to the pattern she had seen. The code seemed to respond when the rhythm felt balanced. It was as if the data itself wanted harmony instead of pure logic. Mira did not know why, but she felt she was close to something real. The next morning, the engineers faced another failure. The board had scheduled an inspection, and the atmosphere in the lab was heavy with pressure. Dr. Halden gave orders quickly, trying to make everyone look busy. Mira arrived again, this time with lunch. She could see the tired faces and the hopeless energy in the room. Rico barely looked up when she placed the boxes down. What if you tried changing the timing of the signals, she asked quietly, like when music is offbeat and you fix it by matching the pause between sounds. Rico blinked, surprised she even remembered that detail. He almost laughed again, but something about her calm tone made him pause. We've tried everything with timing, he said, but not in the way you're thinking. Machines don't have feelings to match. Maybe they don't need feelings, Mira said. Just balance. Halden overheard them and frowned but said nothing. The team continued their work, but the words stuck in his mind. Balance. It was. Such a simple thought, yet they had been chasing complexity for weeks. As evening came, Mira left the building and looked back one more time. The tall tower glowed like a beacon in the fading sunlight. She wondered if they would ever fix it, or if Project Helix would die before it even started. She did not know that her small observation had already begun to change how Rico was thinking. That night he opened the system log again and looked at the feedback rhythm. He noticed something odd. The pattern was not random. It was looping in a way that matched natural heartbeats. Every fifth pulse, there was a small gap, like a pause. It reminded him of Mira's words. Balance. He made a few changes in the simulation and ran the code. For the first time, the system responded a little longer before shutting down again. It was not a fix, but it was a reaction. He called Halden and showed him the result. The older man stared at the data and then asked how he came to this idea. Rico hesitated and said it came from something the delivery girl mentioned. Halden raised his eyebrows but did not dismiss it. He told Rico to keep testing. Meanwhile, Mira rode her bike through the sleeping streets of Novatech. The wind felt cold but alive against her face. She did not know that inside the shining tower she had already started a ripple. 30 engineers had failed to see the pattern as anything more than logic, but one girl who delivered their meals had noticed the rhythm of life hiding inside the code. She did not need a degree or a lab to see what others could not. All she needed was curiosity, patience, and the courage to ask one simple question. The night grew quiet around her. Somewhere in the sky, a few test drones from another project flew past, their small lights blinking like stars. Mira smiled as she watched them disappear into the distance. She had no idea that soon the same kind of drones would carry her name across the city, not as a delivery worker but as the person who helped bring them to life. The morning light spread over the city of Novatech, bouncing off the tall glass towers like a sea of gold. Inside Asterion Dynamics, the halls buzzed with tension. The engineers had spent the night reviewing new test results. The AI system still refused to stay online for more than a few seconds, yet one small change had shown something different. The loop delay adjustment that Rico tested, inspired by Mira's casual remark, had caused the AI to respond slightly longer before shutting down. It was a small success, but enough to stir hope among the exhausted team doctor. Halden stood in front of the main console as his team gathered around. His voice was calm but carried a quiet urgency. He told them that the delay change might be a clue. Maybe the system was not broken, but waiting for a balance in its feedback rhythm. The engineers looked confused. They were trained to see logic and precision, not rhythm or balance. Halden explained that perhaps the system had become too perfect. Its internal loops were firing without pause, like a heart beating too fast until it stopped. They needed to find the right pace for the AI's thought process. Rico looked thoughtful. He had told Halden that the idea came from the delivery girl, but most of the team did not know. Halden decided to keep that quiet for now. He wanted to see where the tests would lead before confusing the board with strange ideas about rhythm and emotion. The engineers returned to their stations and began experimenting with signal timing and pulse intervals. For hours they adjusted parameters and reran simulations, but nothing gave a stable result. By noon, frustration had returned. The system started for a moment and then failed again. The AI's core displayed the same message: feedback loop failure. Halden leaned back and sighed. He could feel the board's pressure building like a storm. The project was already over budget. Investors wanted results. His team was brilliant, yet they were trapped in their own logic. Outside the lab, Mira arrived with another delivery. She had not slept much because her mind was still busy with ideas. The pattern she had seen on the screens kept replaying in her head. She parked her delivery bike near the security gate and walked inside, carrying 2 boxes of food. The receptionist greeted her with a smile. Everyone in the building recognized her by now. She was polite, quiet, and always curious. When Mira entered the lab, she noticed how tired the engineers looked. Some had dark circles under their eyes. Rico waved to her weakly as she set the boxes on the table. She asked softly if they had fixed the problem. Rico shook his head and told her that the system was still failing, even though they had tried everything. Mira nodded and looked at the main screen again. The blue and white lines moved across it like waves on water. To her, it almost looked alive, like something trying to breathe but unable to find the right rhythm. She turned to Rico and said, "It looks like it wants to talk, but it can't find the words." Rico laughed a little. "If it could talk, maybe it would tell us what's wrong," he said. "But AI doesn't talk unless it's programmed to. It only reacts to commands." Mira thought about it for a moment and replied, "Maybe it's reacting already, but in its own way." Before Rico could answer, Dr. Halden walked over. He had heard her voice and wanted to thank her for the food. He was polite but clearly distracted. Mira could see the stress in his face. She told him she hoped the project worked soon because everyone here looked exhausted. Halden smiled slightly and said they were doing their best. Then he noticed that Mira was staring at the central code pattern again. "You seem interested in our work," he said kindly. "Do you understand programming?" Mira shook her head. "Not really," she replied, "but I like patterns. Sometimes I see them easier than words." Halden raised an eyebrow. "Patterns," she pointed at the screen. "This one repeats in a strange way. It doesn't look like an error. It looks like it's waiting for something to match." Halden looked back at the screen. Her words echoed what he had been thinking since last night. He asked her what kind of match she meant. Mira said it was like 2 voices trying to sing together but slightly out of time. If one voice waits for the other, the song becomes smooth. If both try to lead, they clash and stop. The AI might be stuck in that clash. The idea sounded strange to Halden, yet something in his mind clicked. He thanked her and said he would keep that in mind. After she left, he told his team to test a synchronized rhythm model. They adjusted the signal so that the AI core and the drone network pulses aligned with alternating beats instead of simultaneous ones. The first test failed, but the second lasted nearly 15 seconds before shutting down. It was the longest response yet. Excitement spread through the room. For the first time in weeks, they had real progress. The engineers began to discuss new ways to stabilize the system using pulse balance. Rico grinned and said, "I told you maybe we were overthinking this." Halden nodded but reminded everyone that they still needed proof before celebrating. He did not tell them that a delivery girl had just reshaped their entire direction. Meanwhile, Mira was finishing her deliveries around the city. She kept thinking about what she had seen. She was not sure if her words had helped, but she felt proud that she had at least tried. As she stopped at a small cafe for lunch, she looked at her old tablet again. The simulation she had made the previous night was still running, flashing a slow green pulse. It reminded her of a heartbeat. She wondered if machines could have their own kind of heartbeat, one made of data instead of blood. Maybe that was what balance meant back in the lab. Rico continued experimenting. He tried different pulse intervals, running simulations one after another. The AI now lasted 20 seconds before freezing. That was progress, but the system still lacked stability. Halden gathered everyone for a quick meeting. He told them that maybe the problem was deeper than timing. Perhaps the AI was not only reacting to signal rhythm, but also to emotional patterns from its training data. They had taught it to learn like a human, yet they had given it nothing human to feel connected to. Without context, the AI looped endlessly, trying to define purpose. The engineers listened, but no one had a solution. They were scientists, not philosophers. Halden told them to rest for the evening and come back with fresh ideas tomorrow. Rico decided to stay late anyway. When everyone left, he sat alone in the dim lab, staring at the silent monitors. Then he remembered Mira's words again. It looks like it wants to talk. He thought about that. Maybe the AI was not broken at all. Maybe it was trying to communicate in a way no one understood yet. He opened the communication log of the AI and noticed that between every loop failure, there was a tiny signal spike. It was small enough to be ignored by most systems. Out of curiosity, he magnified it. The pattern repeated like a sequence of tones. It was not random. It was like a rhythm repeating a short message. Rico recorded the pattern and played it through the lab's sound system. The speakers gave out a soft pulse tone, almost musical. He sat there listening to it, amazed. It sounded like a heartbeat mixed with static. He realized that the AI had been sending this pulse every time it restarted. It was like a cry for synchronization, as if it was trying to say, "I'm here, but I can't connect." At that same moment, Mira was on her way home. The streets of Novatech were quiet, the air filled with the soft hum of delivery drones overhead. She passed by a large screen that displayed news about Asterion dynamics. The public had no idea of the internal struggles. The headline called Project Helix, the Future of Logistics. Mira smiled a little, wondering if the company would ever solve the problem. She had no idea that her observation about rhythm was now changing the project from the inside. The next morning, the engineers returned to find Rico already working. He showed them the sound pattern he discovered. The team gathered around, listening in silence. The simple pulse filled the air. It was strange but soothing. Halden looked thoughtful. He asked Rico how he found it. Rico said it had been in the data all along. No one had noticed because they were only watching numbers, not listening. Halden realized that the AI was indeed waiting for synchronization, not command. It was reaching out for balance between machine precision and human imperfection. That was what Mira had sensed instinctively. They started building a synchronization test based on the pulse tone. The goal was to send a responding rhythm back to the AI, creating a loop of harmony. It was not standard engineering, but they had nothing to lose. When they ran the test, the lab lights dimmed slightly as the AI core came online. The pulse from the speakers changed tone, growing smoother and steadier. The system's display flashed active for 30 seconds before shutting down again, but this time it left behind a stable data trace. The engineers erupted in applause. For the first time they knew they were close. Halden smiled and said they might have just found the language the AI understood. Rico whispered that it felt like music. The team worked through the day, improving the rhythm link. They began to think of the AI as more than a program. It was like a young mind learning to breathe in time with its surroundings. When Mira arrived again in the evening, the energy in the lab felt different. People were smiling. The tension had lifted slightly. Rico rushed to tell her that the system had finally responded longer than ever before. She was surprised and happy. He thanked her without. Morning came bright and clear over the city of Novatech. The air was full of the hum of delivery drones flying above the skyline. Inside the Asterion Dynamics Tower, the engineers were already at work. The room that had once felt tense now carried a spark of hope. After weeks of failure, the AI of Project Helix was finally reacting. The strange rhythmic pulses that Mira had noticed had become the key to unlocking progress. Even though the AI still shut down after a short time, the pattern was no longer random. It had started to respond to the synchronized beats sent by the engineers. They had given the machine something new to follow, something human in its timing. Dr. Halden walked into the lab holding a tablet full of reports. He looked at the team and nodded with quiet approval. For the first time in days, they did not look defeated. He knew they still had a long way to go, but progress, no matter how small, was progress. Rico greeted him and explained the latest results. The new rhythm model had allowed the AI to remain stable for almost 1 full minute before the system shut down again. That was more than twice the previous record. Halden smiled faintly and said that they might finally be seeing the light at the end of the tunnel as the engineers discussed more adjustments. The main screen glowed with soft blue light. In the center of the display, the word active appeared, followed by waves of shifting data that moved like a heartbeat. The sound of gentle beeps filled the air. The AI was alive, though only for short bursts. Rico leaned closer to the screen and said that it almost looked like the system was trying to speak. Halden agreed. It was responding in rhythm, but not in language yet. They still needed to decode what the pulses meant. Meanwhile, Mira was finishing her morning route through the lower city. Her delivery app blinked with a new order from Asterion Dynamics. She smiled because she knew the engineers would still be at it. She loaded the boxes onto her bike and began her ride through the clean streets lined with glowing signs. As she rode, she thought about the rhythm she had seen. She could still picture it in her mind like the pattern of a song she could not forget. Something inside her told her that it was more than code. It felt alive in some way she could not explain. When she arrived at the building, the security guard greeted her with a friendly wave. Everyone had grown used to seeing her now. She made her way to the lab carrying breakfast for the team. The doors slid open and she found Rico standing near the console with a tired but excited look on his face. He thanked her for the food and told her they were making progress. Mira smiled and asked how the system was doing. Rico pointed to the screen and said the AI was stable for nearly a minute now. That was a record. Mira's eyes widened in surprise. She looked at the glowing waves on the display and said it looked peaceful now. Dr. Halden joined them. He thanked Mira for bringing the food again and told her that her earlier words about rhythm had given them a new direction. Mira blushed slightly and said she was glad it helped even a little. Halden then asked her if she wanted to see something interesting. She nodded and he gestured toward the main console. On the screen was a graph of sound waves that represented the AI's pulse. When he pressed a button, the speakers released a slow, steady tone like a gentle heartbeat mixed with soft static. Mira listened carefully. It sounded almost soothing. Then Halden pressed another button and the AI responded with another tone, slightly higher. Mira's eyes widened again. It was like the machine was answering back. "We think it is trying to form a connection," Halden said. "It might be using rhythm as a kind of communication." Mira asked if it could understand words. Halden replied that it was too early to know. The system was still learning how to synchronize. It was like a newborn mind that only knew how to breathe but not how to speak. Mira thought about that and said maybe it needed something simple to start with, like a melody or a pattern it could recognize. Halden found her suggestion interesting and told Rico to test a new signal pattern based on simple repeating tones. Mira watched as they built the sequence. When they ran the program, the AI responded again with a slightly different rhythm. It was not speech, but it was definitely interaction. The engineers looked at each other with growing excitement. By midday, the lab was full of energy. The team tested many patterns and the AI kept reacting in ways that were unexpected. Sometimes it sped up, sometimes it slowed down, and once it even matched a pattern perfectly before shutting off. Every time it responded, Mira's eyes lit up. She could see that something amazing was happening, something beyond what anyone had planned. Halden decided to record all the sessions for analysis. He also began preparing a report for the board to show that Project Helix was finally on the right path. For the first time in months, he felt proud of his team and thankful for the unexpected help that had guided them here that evening. The city sky turned orange as the sun sank behind the towers. Most of the engineers packed up to rest, but Rico stayed behind again. He wanted to keep testing the rhythm responses. Mira had finished her deliveries for the day, but decided to stop by the building one last time. She found Rico sitting alone in the quiet lab, staring at the monitors. He looked surprised but happy to see her. She asked if the system was still running. He nodded and said he was trying something new. He had created a smaller test console so he could connect an external chip to the AI core. The chip would send pulse signals directly instead of through the main network. It was risky but safe for testing. Mira looked at the chip and recognized it as the same type used in her delivery devices. She smiled and said she had worked with similar chips before. Rico laughed and said she probably knew more about these little gadgets than half the team. He explained that the idea was to mimic the natural rhythm of a heartbeat, not just through code, but through actual signal pulses. The AI might respond more strongly to something that felt alive rather than mechanical. They set up the small test together. Rico asked Mira to start the sequence when he gave the signal. When he nodded, she pressed the button. The screen lit up instantly. The AI core pulsed with a stronger rhythm than before. The blue lines on the display moved faster, matching the signal from the chip. For almost 2 minutes, the system stayed stable before slowly fading again. Rico could not believe it. That was twice as long as their best record. He turned to Mira in shock and asked what she had done differently. Mira said she had added a half-beat pause before pressing start. It was a habit she had when timing deliveries on her bike. The pause created a balance she always trusted. Rico stared at her and laughed in disbelief. "You mean you just gave it a human pause," he said. "And it worked." Mira shrugged and smiled. "Maybe it just needed a little patience." They both laughed. Rico saved the data and marked it as the most stable session yet. He knew they had found something real. The AI had responded not to pure logic but to timing that came from instinct. It was a discovery none of the 30 engineers had thought of. He looked at Mira with new respect. She might not have studied programming, but she saw what they could not. Later that night, Dr. Halden returned to the lab to check on their progress. When he saw the results, he was speechless. The logs showed that the AI had remained active for over 2 minutes without error. He asked how it happened, and Rico told him the full story. Halden turned to Mira, who looked nervous, and said with a smile that she had just made history. She had found the missing rhythm the AI needed to stay alive. Her instinct to wait half a beat had given the machine the harmony it needed. Halden said they would present this discovery to the board soon. It would change everything about how they designed artificial intelligence. Mira could hardly believe it. She was just a delivery worker who had walked into a building carrying lunch. Now she was standing in a high-tech lab surrounded by people who looked at her with admiration. She felt shy but proud. Rico told her that from now on, her name would be part of the project logs as a contributor. Halden added that the company might owe her more than they could ever repay. Mira thanked them softly and said she was just glad to help as the night deepened. The lab lights dimmed and the hum of the AI console filled the air. The system was resting, saving its new data patterns. On the screen, the waves of blue light pulsed slowly and calmly. Mira watched it for a long moment and said it looked almost peaceful, like it had finally found its heartbeat. Halden nodded and said that sometimes progress comes not from great knowledge, but from a simple understanding of what it means to be alive. Outside the building, the city glowed with thousands of moving lights. Mira rode her bike home through the wide streets, her mind full of thoughts. She wondered how a tiny pause in timing could make such a difference. Maybe machines were not that different from people after all. They both needed rhythm and rest. They both needed balance. The night air felt cool against her face as she smiled to herself. She had no idea that her discovery would soon shock the entire boardroom and change the future of Asterian dynamics forever. Back in the lab, Halden and Rico reviewed the data once more. They agreed that the next step would be a full system test using the new rhythm model. If it succeeded, they could announce that Project Helix was operational. They also decided that Mira should be invited to the demonstration as a guest. The morning sun poured through the tall glass windows of Asterian Dynamics boardroom. The room was vast, filled with polished tables, high-backed chairs, and bright holographic displays that floated in midair. Today was the day the board of directors would witness Project Helix in action. Investors, executives, and senior engineers gathered, their expressions a mix of skepticism and curiosity. They had been waiting months for results. Many expected another failure. Yet inside, a small hope lingered, sparked by a delivery girl no one thought would make a difference. Mira stood quietly near the back of the room. She wore her simple delivery jacket and jeans. Her hair was tied back neatly. She felt nervous but excited. This was her first time entering a world of suits, titles, and power. She carried nothing but a small notebook where she had scribbled her observations about rhythm. She had been invited by Dr. Halden, who had insisted that she watch the demonstration. He had told her she deserved to see the result of her insight firsthand. The engineers, including Rico, worked at the main console at the front of the room. Halden stood near them ready to explain the test. The room fell silent as the CEO, a tall man with sharp eyes named Mr. Lucan, cleared his throat. He addressed everyone, saying that 30 engineers had failed to bring Project Helix online, yet somehow the system was now stable. Some in the room muttered in disbelief. Others raised eyebrows, curious to see what had changed. Lucan leaned back in his chair and said he wanted proof, not stories. Dr. Halden stepped forward. He gestured to the floating display where the AI's core interface hovered in blue and white waves. He explained that the system had been struggling to synchronize its feedback loops. For weeks, engineers tried every known method, but the AI refused to stay active. Then a small observation about rhythm, made by someone outside the engineering team, inspired a new approach. The room went quiet. Halden paused, then said that the AI had responded to a simple pattern of synchronized pulses that created balance in its operation. He did not reveal the observer's identity yet. One of the board members frowned. "A pattern?" she asked. "Are you saying it was solved by intuition?" Halden nodded. Yes, the AI required a form of balance that no standard code could provide. The solution was discovered by noticing a natural rhythm. It is now stable for testing. At that, Rico stepped forward. "We prepared a live demonstration," he said. "You will see the system respond to a synchronized pulse input." The board members leaned forward as Rico activated the console. Lights danced on the display, showing the AI's data streams. Slowly, the core stabilized. Blue waves pulsed in gentle intervals. Then speakers filled the room with a steady tone like a heartbeat. Everyone in the room held their breath. The pulse continued, steady and calm. It lasted for nearly 2 full minutes without any errors. Mira watched in amazement. She could feel the rhythm almost like a song. She realized this was the moment she had helped make possible. The engineers were amazed too. Some of them whispered to each other, surprised at how simple the solution had been. The AI was active. It was functioning. It was alive in a sense, responding to the pulse of its surroundings. The room, which had been tense with skepticism, began to feel the energy of success. Mr. Lucan's sharp eyes studied the display. He turned to Halden. "Explain exactly how this worked," he demanded. 30 experts could not achieve this. How did a small pattern solve it? Halden cleared his throat and looked at Mira. The AI required a rhythm, a balance, to synchronize its learning core and drone network. A suggestion from our observer inspired a method that no engineer had considered. By sending a small timed pulse, the system responded. It stabilized. Lucan frowned, skeptical. "Who is this observer?" Halden gestured to Mira. "She is the person who noticed the pattern." She saw something the rest of us did not. A murmur ran through the room. Mira froze. All eyes turned toward her. She felt her heartbeat quicken, but she stepped forward slowly. The murmurs grew louder as people whispered, wondering how a delivery girl could have contributed to such a critical project. Rico quickly added, "Her observation allowed us to test a new synchronization method." The AI's response was immediate and stable. We would not have reached this point without her insight. The boardroom fell silent. Some executives looked skeptical, but most were stunned. No one had expected someone outside the technical team, someone with no degree or title, to solve a problem that 30 engineers could not. Mira felt a mix of nerves and pride. She looked at the screen and then at the engineers. Everyone smiled at her quietly. She realized that she had made a real difference. Mr. Lucan finally spoke. His tone was serious, but curiosity shone through. "So you are telling us a delivery girl with no formal training noticed something that 30 engineers overlooked, and now Project Helix is functional?" He leaned back in his chair and studied Mira closely. "Explain." Mira took a deep breath. She tried to speak clearly. "I just noticed a repeating pattern in the AI's signals. It looked like it was waiting for something, like a beat between notes. I thought maybe it needed balance, a pause to complete the rhythm. When we tested that, the system stayed active longer. I did not expect it to be important, I just thought it might help." Some board members exchanged glances, still not believing. One whispered to another, "This is impossible." Yet the results on the screen were undeniable. The AI had responded. It was functioning. Thanks to the small human insight that Mira had offered, Dr. Halden added. Her suggestion inspired a rhythm-based synchronization approach. It worked when all other methods failed. The AI is now stable and ready for full operation tests. Lucan leaned forward, now fully intrigued. We will need detailed documentation, he said. I want to understand the method, and I want to ensure that this approach can be replicated. If this is true, it changes everything about how we train AI systems. Rico nodded. We have already begun compiling all data. The method is simple in concept but effective. Mira's observation helped us see a solution we could not see with logic alone. Mira felt her cheeks warm. She had never been in a situation like this. All eyes in the room were on her, yet she stayed calm. She realized that this was not about praise or recognition. It was about solving a problem and seeing a difference her simple insight had made. For the first time, she felt the weight of her contribution, and it was wonderful. The boardroom staff asked many questions about the process. How did the pulse work? How was it implemented? Could it scale to full operation? Mira listened as the engineers explained technical details in simple terms. Even though she did not understand everything, she understood enough to see that her idea had truly changed the course of the project. The AI was no longer just a machine. It was a system that could respond to subtle human insight. That was something entirely new, one executive asked. Will this method apply to other systems? Halden responded, yes, it opens a new perspective. AI may not always require more complexity. Sometimes it needs human understanding, intuition, and balance. Lucan stood, finally satisfied. Then we will move forward. Full operation test will begin next week, and we will formally acknowledge the contribution of our observer. This is unprecedented, but it is clear that human insight, even outside formal engineering, can advance technology in ways we never imagined. The room was silent for a moment. Then applause broke out. The engineers clapped for Mira. Some board members nodded respectfully. Mira blushed but smiled. She had never imagined that delivering packages could lead to this. Her simple observation had changed the trajectory of a major project. It was not luck. It was attention, patience, and curiosity. After the meeting, Rico led Mira to a quiet room with a window overlooking the city. The lights of Novatech glimmered like stars. He said, You know, this is going to be remembered for a long time. You solved what 30 experts could not. Mira shook her head. I just noticed a pattern. That is all, Rico smiled. That is everything. Sometimes, it is the simplest observation that makes the biggest difference. You reminded us that machines may need logic, but progress needs humanity. Mira looked out at the city and thought about the drones flying overhead, the pulse of lights across the skyline, and the rhythm of life that connected all things. She realized that sometimes change did not require degrees or titles. It required seeing the world in a slightly different way, noticing the patterns that others missed, and trusting your instincts. That night, as the lab lights dimmed, Project Helix continued its quiet testing. The AI's core pulsed steadily in rhythm. The system had finally found balance. The engineers who had once struggled and failed now watched with quiet pride. They knew this was a breakthrough not just in technology, but in understanding the potential of human insight. A simple observation had unlocked a path that even the most complex logic could not. Mira left the building on her bike, the cool night air rushing past her face. She thought about the strange journey she had been part of. From delivering food to witnessing history, she had learned that sometimes the smallest insight could make the largest impact. She had helped remind the world that machines could be powerful, but humanity, the ability to observe, notice, and act, was still more important. She smiled as she rode through the glowing streets, knowing that the pulse of life she had noticed had awakened. The morning sunlight glimmered on the tall towers of Novatech, reflecting off glass and metal in golden streaks. Inside Asterian Dynamics, the lab was alive with energy. The engineers were busy preparing for the full operational test of Project Helix. For weeks, the system had been responding steadily to the pulse rhythm inspired by Mira's observation. Today, it would run on the entire drone network for the first time. Everyone knew the stakes. If it failed, years of work and investment could be lost. If it succeeded, it would change the future of logistics and artificial intelligence. Mira arrived early, carrying breakfast for the team as usual. She was nervous but excited. She knew the system had already performed well in test runs, but this was different. Today, the full network would activate. She placed the boxes on the table and glanced at the console. Blue waves pulsed calmly across the main display. The AI core was ready. Rico gave her a reassuring smile. "You're part of this too," he said. Mira nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility and pride. She was about to witness something extraordinary. Dr. Halden gathered the engineers and Mira around the main console. He explained the process to the board members, who were present in the lab for the demonstration. The system would run Project Helix across all connected drones, testing delivery coordination, navigation, and obstacle avoidance. Every drone in the network would respond in real time to the AI's commands. Halden emphasized that the synchronized pulse rhythm was crucial. Without it, the AI would shut down immediately. With it, the system could perform at full capacity. Lucan, the CEO, leaned forward in his chair. His sharp eyes scanned the console and the engineers. He had been skeptical at first, but seeing the system remain stable for the past tests had shifted his confidence. "We will watch carefully," he said. "If this works, it will validate not only the AI design, but the power of human insight." Rico activated the synchronization sequence. Mira watched as the gentle pulse tone filled the room. The blue waves of the AI core moved in harmony with the signal. Then the display expanded to show the full network of drones. Tiny lights appeared across the city map, representing each drone. They blinked in rhythm with the AI core. Mira could almost feel the pulse in her chest. It was like the heartbeat of the entire city. The drones began moving, rising from their docking stations in smooth arcs. Each followed the AI's guidance perfectly. They carried small parcels, avoiding obstacles and coordinating with each other flawlessly. The engineers watched, some with wide eyes, others with smiles of disbelief. The board members murmured quietly, impressed by the precision. For the first time, Project Helix was performing as designed, and the system had not shut down once. Dr. Halden gestured toward Mira. "Her observation helped us reach this point," he said. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. Mira felt a rush of emotions. She had never imagined that delivering food would lead to this. She had only noticed a pattern in the AI's signals, a small rhythm that seemed important. That simple observation had inspired a solution that no one else had seen. Lucan leaned forward, his expression serious but respectful. "It is remarkable," he said. "A small insight from an unexpected source has enabled the success of a major technological breakthrough. This is a lesson in the power of human perspective." He paused. "We will make sure your contribution is officially recognized." Mira nodded quietly, feeling a sense of pride she had never experienced before. The demonstration continued. The drones moved through the city with perfect timing, avoiding collisions and responding to changes in traffic patterns. The AI managed the network seamlessly. Every delivery point was reached on schedule. The system was efficient, reliable, and precise. It was clear to everyone present that this was more than a technical success. It was a triumph of creativity and insight, the combination of human observation and artificial intelligence. Rico looked at Mira and whispered, "You did this. We couldn't have done it without you." Mira shook her head softly. "I only noticed what was already there," she replied. "The system was trying to tell us something. I just paid attention." Rico smiled, realizing that sometimes the simplest awareness could be the most powerful tool. Dr. Halden addressed the room. "What we have achieved here is not just a functioning AI system. It is proof that human intuition and curiosity are as important as technical skill. Project Helix shows that even in a world of machines, human insight is essential." Mira reminded us that progress is not always about complexity. Sometimes it is about seeing what is missing and filling it with understanding. The board members nodded, some taking notes, others speaking quietly among themselves. The CEO, Lucan, finally spoke again. "This is a story we will share widely. Not only the success of the AI, but the lesson it teaches. Innovation requires not only expertise, but also observation, imagination, and courage. Mira, you have reminded us of the value of human insight." Mira smiled, feeling a warmth that went beyond recognition. It was the acknowledgement that she had made a real difference. As the demonstration concluded, the engineers returned the drones to their docking stations. The AI core's pulse slowed, settling into a steady, calm rhythm. The room was filled with a quiet sense of awe. Project Helix had passed the most important test. It was now ready for real-world application. The team celebrated quietly, aware that this moment marked a turning point not only for the project but for the understanding of AI development itself. Mira stayed by the console, watching the waves of light on the display. She thought about how simple it had been. A small pause, a rhythm, a moment of observation. That was all it had taken to unlock the system. She realized that the world often overlooked these small but important details. People searched for complexity, but sometimes the answers were already present, waiting to be noticed. She smiled, proud that her curiosity had made a difference later. In a meeting room overlooking the city, Halden, Rico, and Mira spoke with the board. They discussed plans for full deployment of Project Helix, safety measures, and scalability. Mira listened carefully, learning new terms and ideas, but she also realized something important. She did not need to fully understand every detail. Her role was to notice patterns, ask questions, and trust her instincts. That was enough to create change. The board concluded the meeting with formal acknowledgement of Mira's contribution. They praised her insight and recognized the value of human perspective in technological innovation. Investors smiled, knowing that Project Helix was now operational and backed by both brilliant engineering and human observation. Mira felt a sense of pride but also humility. She had helped, but the engineers had executed the plan. It was teamwork, combining different kinds of knowledge and skills that had brought success. After the meeting, Mira walked through the city streets as the sun began to set. Lights shimmered on the buildings and streets, reflecting off the glass like a river of stars. She watched drones fly past, carrying parcels efficiently across the city. The pulse of Project Helix was now part of the city itself. She felt a sense of connection, realizing that her small observation had created ripples across a vast network of machines, humans, and systems. Rico rode beside her on a small service bike, chatting quietly. "You know," he said, "this story is going to inspire a lot of people. It will be remembered, not just for the AI, but for the lesson it teaches about human insight." Mira nodded, thinking about the journey. From delivering food to influencing a citywide AI network, it had been an unexpected adventure. She realized that anyone could contribute if they noticed what others missed and acted on it. That night, the city of Novatech glowed like a constellation of lights. Mira returned home tired but happy. She sat at her small table with her notebook, writing down her thoughts about the day. She wanted to remember every detail, the pulse of the AI, the rhythm that made it work, the pride of the engineers, and the astonishment of the board. She understood now that innovation was not just about knowledge, but about attention, curiosity, and the courage to act on a simple observation. As she closed her notebook, she looked out at the skyline and thought about the future. Project Helix would continue to expand and improve, but its success would always carry her mark. She realized that progress was a collaboration between humans and machines, guided by observation, empathy, and understanding. The heartbeat she had noticed was not just in the AI. It was in everyone who saw potential where others saw failure, in every moment of human insight that sparks discovery. In the weeks that followed, the story of Project Helix and Mira's contribution spread through the company and eventually to the public. She was invited to speak to new engineers, students, and innovators. Her message was simple: pay attention to the patterns around you. Notice what others ignore. Small insights can lead to big discoveries. She inspired people not because she had studied AI or engineering formally, but because she had trusted her instincts and acted on curiosity. That was the true lesson of Project Helix. The engineers returned to their work with renewed energy, now viewing AI development through a lens of balance, rhythm, and human insight. They remembered that a single observation could change the course of a project. Halden continued to lead, proud of his team and grateful for the delivery girl who had changed everything. Rico worked on a